Chapter 6. Astral Train. Why don't we stay on track? I had a dream.
Ha ha.
Last night's night school session seemed to use a wider lens than usual. It was telling me something basic about the human condition. Here's some of what happened in the dream. I was on a train with many different people. There was a sense that we were all prisoners. Now that I think of it, we were being transported from one jail-like facility to another. Our crimes seemed more like minor violations, more like misdemeanors than felonies. The train was moving. I was startled to see one passenger jump off the train and fall hard on his rear end. The train was moving too fast to see if he was badly hurt, but I was pretty sure it couldn't have turned out well for someone who was planning to enjoy freedom. Nonetheless, his actions inspired others to jump off the train. They were able to do so more successfully and even made it look fairly easy. Several different passengers escaped in this fashion at different points in the dream's vaguely portrayed landscape that the train was traversing. One couple, an older man and woman, were hiding in what looked to be a stable with animals in it, although I can't recall seeing specific animals. They were making themselves comfortable in a stall, but were looking outside of it to see if they could establish a life beyond the stable, a life in which they could continue to be free, not apprehended by the law. In a semi-lucid moment of the dream, I sensed I was able to talk to the couple, even though I was still on the train and it would have moved far beyond where they jumped off. I was telling them that they would get caught sooner or later, and that it would be better to stay on the train and to faithfully ride the whole thing out. A more enduring freedom seemed plausible if we don't jump off the train. Looking back on my dream, I think I can see the main point of the night school lesson. My connected self was telling my concrete self, the older man of the couple, to stay the course and faithfully work through the current social and political struggles we are going through now here in the USA. The states of the United States have not seemed all that united recently. Some appear comfortable with federal overreach that has a strong authoritarian flavor. Others are victimized by it and are actively opposing it. The various prisoners were symbolic of the hard-working United States immigrants whose only crime is insufficient certification. Perhaps many of them are willing to become citizens, but the process is difficult. Perhaps they really haven't made enough effort to become legal. I don't know. I suspect, however, that insufficient resources have made the achievement of citizenship or visas, etc., easier said than done. I also suspect that racism is the real reason so many of these people are being persecuted. Whole blocks of voters are tempted to feel superior to others in order to offset their own feelings of vulnerability in a highly competitive world that threatens to leave them behind. If a person feels like he or she is losing, it's easy to pump them up with delusions of power. White supremacy is a drug that can be used to manipulate voters. The illegal immigrants are, for the most part, collateral damage for a ruthless campaign by the rich and powerful who want to rig the system in an exploitive manner. This is the terrorizing train that many are riding. Some are being railroaded right out of the American dream. Others, like me, are being terrorized by seeing the possible destruction of democratic systems, individual rights, equal opportunities, and, in general, a humane society. Even as a bona fide American citizen, I too feel like a prisoner on the train. This is not the country I signed up for or believed in. I would love to live in America again if it would only come back. Singer-songwriter Cat Stevens had a hit song called Peace Train. We are not riding on that train currently. It is the opposite of a peace train, and the opposite of a love train. My dreams seem to be telling me, don't use denial and distraction or emotional acting out to gain a fleeting sense of freedom from the social and political struggle. Don't give in to the animal-like instincts of the flesh to seek immediate gratification. Take the long view. Hang in there. While this message was being transmitted, my spirit was moving along in the astral plane, symbolized as a train instead of the airplane version of the word plane. The dreaming mind is famous for puns like that. At any given point in the dream, I could have cut the dream and its message short by just re-entering my body. In lucid dreaming terms, I could have allowed the dream to become too destabilized. I could have left my night school session before it was over. Sometimes we are tempted to go to recess before the recess bell rings, or to go home before the school bell rings at the end of the school day. Some of the lessons get tedious. Some of the lessons, like this one, reveal an inconvenient truth that we would just as soon close our eyes and ears to. But I managed to have enough spiritual integrity and lucidity to allow my connected self to continue the ride in the astral plane/train and continue the dream message. I now know that I must faithfully deal with the terrible political landscape threatening my beloved country and its commendable experiment with a pluralistic multicultural democracy. Don't lose track of the importance of faith. And don't get off faith's track. Don't just emotionally act out. Neither should I simply ignore the horrible way that government officials are lying and abusing power. Ride this rough train out, even though it seems heading for a real train wreck. My connected self was reassuring me that it will work out in the long run. And even if it doesn't, I can choose to make some lemonade of those bitter lemons. Go the distance. Make the most of whatever life has in store for you, Daryl. But my connected self is connected not only to my concrete self, it is connected to the other side from where harmonization and peace can flow into this turbulent world of ours. The astral plane where my spirit can travel is the cosmic computer's hardware that helps make the collective software, our government, law, and norms that forms a peaceful social and cultural landscape. In this way, God can help us make a better world. And we can more fully participate in the Grand Reclamation Project that I mentioned in the previous chapter. I had another wide-angle dream about collective experience many years ago, right before the tragic 9/11 tragedy. The dream included many images that matched the events that would follow in the day or days ahead. I don't recall exactly how much it predated the actual events, but it was a very short time. In the dream, humans were mutated by something. Also, something suspended me as the dream's witness of the transformative or destructive action in midair, on top of a very tall stepladder. In real life, after the tragic Twin Towers event occurred, the up on a stepladder image in the dream eerily suggested that my spirit had sensed ahead of time the experiences of people in the towers and in the plane. At the point of the catastrophic impact, the image in the dream had the quality of being frozen in time, as though indicating a monumental historical event. The dream also included an earlier image like a melting pot that somehow involved stock market ticker tape. The active melting pot symbolized the cultural assimilation problems related to the culture shock of a fast-moving global marketplace, symbolized by the ticker tape coming from a machine. With our astral projection theory in mind, the images of that dream years ago also suggest the confusion and intensity of my astral body re-entering my physical body. But as I said earlier in this book, dreams are famous for meaning and/or doing more than one thing at a time. The mechanics or logistics of spirit seem to occur in parallel with imparted information and consciousness. My night school sessions, including those that provide glimpses into the future like my dream before September 11th, are software programs that run while the cosmic computer hardware does its thing. The software programs provide information. The hardware handles not yet understood realities, such as crossover between different dimensions. Interestingly, I have noticed a pattern in which things dreamed earlier in the night tend to happen later in the next day, and things that happen later in the sleep period tend to happen early the next day. In other words, a reversed timeline, a mirror image of a short stretch of my life's journey. Most of my premonitory dreams give me a heads up about personal events to come. But that dream prior to 9/11 was about collective human experiences. Whether last night's dream had any premonitory elements or not, it was like the 9/11 dream in that it also seemed largely about a group truth. I can only hope that last night's dream does turn out to have been a premonition about the prisoner train eventually becoming the peace train. But it probably was like the variety of Chinese fortune cookies that are more about wisdom than prediction. The night school session was telling me to keep the faith. There is an alternate interpretation of the symbolism of the prisoners on the train. This interpretation reflects the spiritual mechanics/dynamics that occur as we dream. It is not at odds with the previous message. Instead, it provides a backstage view of the dream that may help a person get better acquainted with his or her connected self. One of my most persistent night school dream themes is prison and attempts to liberate one another from it. The night school classes themselves often take place in a prison setting as part of an educational program within a corrections facility. The prisoners are the individual spirits who feel fenced in by the confines of physical embodiment and by participation in such a crude and broken world. While the concrete selves don't see themselves as prisoners, the connected selves are aware of a better way of being, one in which they can, metaphorically speaking, spread their wings and fly. They feel like prisoners of a realm that limits their fulfillment of positive potential. My night school is the spiritual realm's attempt to educate my concrete self about the liberating principles of spirituality. I am given a glimpse of God's grace. Another implication is that our true citizenship is with the spectral domain. We are but immigrants from heaven. At the same time my dream revealed the process of astral projection and re-entry, it also showed the larger process of various spirits agreeing to be incarnated. God's loving fingers reach out into and through both the microcosm of Daryl and the macrocosm of humanity. The question remains, why don't the individual and collective forms of physical selves stay on track with spiritual growth? Why do we fall so short of our spiritual potential? Why do we get stuck on partness and miss wholeness and oneness? Why don't we remain receptive to guidance from the astral train, even though we jump off it to do our work on Earth's rocky terrain? Are we simply weak-minded? Or is the mission more difficult than one would assume? I vote on the latter, even though I certainly can't rule out the former. My best bet is that physical existence constantly distracts us from our true citizenship. Being spiritual in a material world is easier said than done. But even a baby step of spiritual being and living is one huge step for humankind and for God. We help bring the big bad bang back to God one step at a time. For good grades. I'm going to gloss over some dream experiences of my confused self rearing its ugly head and go right on to describing a few recent night school sessions from which I received some good grades. I'm in a mood to build upon my success. I got at least a B+ on a dream in which I portrayed an interaction between a seemingly charming character that violently slew animals with a hatchet and a wise character who counseled the hunter about the risk of slipping into cold-hearted sociopathy. The charming animal killer was originally the dominant character in the dream, but in the long run it was the wisdom of the other character that had the authority. The authority of wisdom won out over the apparent authority of heartless achievement. My connected self wisely counseled my concrete self. The slaying of animals is but a symbol of actions that are for achievement's sake only, instead of for the sake of doing good. How many times have we heard someone exclaim, "for goodness sake," as a variation of "I'll be damned"? It was used to express astonishment. Little did we think that it concealed a spiritual principle. We have the potential to do things for the sake of goodness instead of for the sake of worldly achievement. Worldly achievement can be quite arbitrary. What is considered great at one time may be considered quite misguided at another. And people often applaud the wrong things while failing to reinforce truly noble deeds. I think I eventually allowed my concrete self to humbly submit to my connected self in that dream. That's why I claim a grade of B+. I'll claim an A- from a dream around the same time in which I was able to successfully steer a horse I was riding. The horse and I had to cross some fallen fence to get to the place where there was a beautiful magnolia tree in full bloom. So many times, in past dreams I was unable to steer a car because I was sitting in the back seat, unable to reach the steering wheel or apply the brakes as needed. On a good, relatively lucid night I could realize that the steering and the braking can be done mentally. Look ma, no hands. But those dreams seem few and far between. To be able to course-correct the horse and arrive at something quite beautiful suggested that I was mentally accepting the ways of the connected self and not confusing it with the ways of the concrete self. Cooperation was going on between regular me and my spirit as it rode the astral plane in the form of a horse. Interestingly, the character on the back of the horse would naturally be elevated just a few feet from the ground. Not that I noticed the ground in the dream, but that is the physical arrangement of people riding horses. They move along about 4 or 5 feet above the ground. The rider on the dream horse implied the ground upon which the horse was galloping. That ground corresponded to the actual location of my body lying there in bed while I was dreaming. The fact that I was being moved in the dream by an animal suggested that I was integrating the connected self with the physical nature of my concrete self. The concrete self is animal-like in comparison to my spirit. The cooperative horse seemed to indicate that I was allowing my connected self to ride me at the same time it was galloping along in the astral plane. Lifeless, sleeping concrete self was spiritually animated by the connected self. The cosmic stud and the old gray mare were in harmony. The only reason I received an A- instead of an A or a plus is because I was unable to be aware that I was in a dream while this was all going on. Also, the navigation of the horse was not perfectly masterful. I was somewhat surprised in the dream that I was able to successfully guide the horse. But I'll take an A- any day. Rather, any night. I give myself an A on the next night's dream. It seemed I allowed my connected self to take the lead even more completely than I did with the previous dreams, despite the fact that I was not fully lucid. In an earlier frame of the dream, I was running rhythmically along a city street. I spread cheer to the downtrodden as I moved along the sidewalk. I felt spirit-powered. In retrospect, this seemed like a variation of the astral train. The running was symbolic of going along with the flow of the astral plane and semi-lucidly integrating it with down-to-earth experiences. I think I was allowing my astral body to hover gently above me, and I managed to be joyfully receptive to it instead of being frightened by it. My confused self sat this one out. Suddenly, I was in a church, listening to a highly respected minister as he gave a sermon. He said something to the effect that God's love would eventually bring everyone home. I held up my hand. He let me talk, since I was being quite assertive about it, speaking with a sense of authority. I asked, what about those who continue to pledge their allegiance to Satan? Isn't hell their home? I did qualify my remark as being a certain theological perspective. I remember having a great deal of difficulty properly pronouncing the word theological, but managed to blurt out something close enough to be understandable. Then another person from the back pew chimed in. He said something to the effect that he believed Satan was but a personification of an accident that deviated from God's original nature. I indicated that I agreed with his insight and proceeded to say how it best served the fact that we need a loving God much more than we need an omnipotent God. The minister ended the sermon as though the congregants preached the sermon that day, and there was nothing more to be said. Was this dream just a big ego trip for me? I don't think so. The reason I don't think it was ego-based is that I deferred to the other church member, just as the esteemed minister had deferred to me. It was a message about appropriate spiritual empowerment. It had the same vibe as my encouragement of the downtrodden in the preceding dream frame. I was allowing the minister to inspire me, and then I allowed yet another person to respond in a way that further inspired me and the whole congregation. Was the congregation merely the assembly of all my own personality parts? Or was it a symbolic representation of our spiritual interconnection? Or both? I think it was probably both. I give myself a solid A on that night school test because I realized within the dream that connectedness ultimately rules over individual initiative, and yet any given individual can have the spiritual authority to speak a helpful truth to others. It takes a village to become whole, whether the village is constituted of various interpersonal aspects of a single personality or an interpersonal, social version like one body in Christ. We minister to one another, just as my different dream characters ministered to Daryl. I'll give myself an A- for the next dream, the fourth in the series. I feel like I'm cheating because all I'm reporting on here is my breakthrough dreams. It's like showing only the clips of successful plays and skillful moves from a sports event and omitting all the bloopers. Or like a gambler who only tells about his or her winnings and all the money he or she raked in, while failing to recall the times the house won and he or she went home with empty pockets. But, as I said at the beginning of the segment, sometimes we need the psychological boost of a good success story. Memories of the masterful moments can motivate us to persevere when failure becomes the unwanted guest who refuses to leave. In the next chapter, I'll be introducing the concept of conscious vitality. By reviewing these excellent clips from my overall dream history, I am becoming aware of my spiritual vitality. In contrast to the unwanted nightly guests in the form of confusing or nightmarish dreams, this particular dream was one of my welcome visitors. I was providing some good counsel to a prisoner while standing near a doorway. The door happened to be left open as we talked. When I went to exit, I couldn't get through. Prisoners on the other side of the door explained how I needed to let the door fully close before it would allow another person through it. At that point, I noticed that the door was loosely hinged and had to be held in place as it was closed. I held it and closed it, trusting that the information was correct and that it would allow me to exit afterwards. I never actually saw myself pass through the door, but I sensed that I did or definitely would successfully exit. I think I realized that of course the dream would follow the script that I was writing as the dream was occurring. In other words, I was aware that I was in a dream and that it do as I wanted it to. I didn't need to see tangible proof of my own story's plot. I think the counselor was my connected self. The prisoners on the other side of the door may have represented my concrete self who was identifying with his fellow worldly prisoners. I was able to listen and appreciate the help they were giving my connected self. The counselor was effectively counseled by those he normally counseled. That's a lot of cooperation between beings on opposite sides of things. I wish we could work like that in the regular world, instead of thinking the other side is all wrong. I'm also encouraged by the fact that I identified with the connected self in this dream. I was starting to better accept my spiritual side. I believe this showed a wise insight on my part. Allow enlightenment to occur at its own pace, rather than expecting the spiritual, interconnected perspective to flow in an unrestricted manner into the physical frame of reference. Spirituality must be gated and translated. The teacher must learn to work with the students. Processing is required. The dream seemed to be telling me, don't get ahead of yourself as a regular human being, body and all. It's great that you can begin to appreciate your spiritual, connective, potential, and partial development. But you ain't a saint. At least not yet. Why a minus and not a? The dream was still steeped in symbolism instead of directly revealing the wisdom. I was near the top of my game, but not all the way there. And it took me a while to decode the message, assuming I ever managed to do so correctly. But any progress is good. Now that I think of it, that is in line with the main theme of the dream. Give my spiritual development the time it requires. One nation connected to the astral plane. Could one nation connected to the astral plane be another way of saying one nation under God? It would at least be a God taken out of the standard theological boxes. Imagine a vast energy field that we have access to like the cloud on our internet. Imagine that we have a natural ability to connect with it and retrieve both information and guidance. Now go ahead and act as if it is not just imagination. Dare to believe it is real, and then actually put it to use in your dreams and in your waking life. Count it as heaven and let there be a flow of heaven onto earth, into the world. Let there be one world under a God we can all agree about, whether it is the astral plane or just something like it. Come to think of it, I have not even researched the concept of an astral plane. Yet I have used the concept repeatedly throughout this book. Even named a whole chapter after it. Is that reckless on my part? Should I have studied more and talked less? Perhaps. But I tend to think that I wisely chose to avoid specifics. I'm more interested in the spiritual experience. Call the other side thingy what you want. But let's use it. Astral plane is just one of the nicknames of the other side or the deep zone. Traveling. Some of the best insights happen after a good group discussion. After one of the closer walk, group sessions that Becky and I participate in during our church Sunday school, we were talking with a fellow participant who mentioned the mind-broadening effect of travel. He said it expands our worldview and opens our minds by allowing us to experience different cultures and see fellow human beings in a different light. Although I chose not to add an extra layer to the already lengthy conversation, I thought of how my dreams are like journeys, especially now that I associate them with the simultaneous movement of my spirit. Not only does my mind travel the dreamscapes, my spirit travels from one dimension to another. I can't help but think that this dreaming and astral projection activity, like regular travel, helps open my mind, soul, and heart. It helps dissolve the fragments and remove the boulders that block my path of spiritual growth and oneness. And it provides a space I can move into to explore my being and help me discover my true self. It gives me both freedom and room to grow. The experience of spirit. One of the things that the nighttime ritual of dreaming and astral projection provides is an experience of spirit. As a character portraying the connected self is witnessed within a dream, we encounter and experience our own spirit. We might have various degrees of richness, awareness, and inspiration during the experience. Sometimes the character's significance goes unnoticed during the dream, but we might still have a chance to familiarize ourselves with our own spirit during the interpretation phase after awakening. At other times, the opportunity may be missed altogether. A mental veil may make one's connected self appear in the dream to be a stranger or even a menacing intruder. But just as God's beauty manages to shine through the accident called physical reality, our spirit eventually manages to shine through the mental veil. That is, if we try and try again. If you want to get to know your spirit, it'll probably happen, sooner or later. The more lucid we become in our dream, the more direct and intimate our experience of the connected self is. We get to know it better. Two firmly grasped concepts in our wake state mind might carry over like mindsets into our dreaming mind and help us increase lucidity. They have to do with our proper understanding of what it means to have our own spirit. The first concept is one that we previously touched on. We don't own our spirit like we own a shirt or a car. It is merely loaned to us from another dimension. Nonetheless, it is ours for the duration of this life. Ironically, a firm grasp of this concept means a looser than normal grip on the concept of ownership. We own things in the current possessive manner because we can't trust others to share. If everyone shared freely, gladly, and consistently, we would be perfectly fine with not owning stuff. All we really need overall is the availability of resources to meet given needs. If those resources are readily available via sharing, the need to own them more or less disappears. For example, if you need transportation and the means of effective transportation is consistently available, you don't feel the need to own a car. You only need to own a car if you've experienced not being able to get where you need to go without it. A culture of goodwill would need to be developed and maintained. And that would require shaping personalities to be trustworthy. In such a culture, greed and obsession with owning things would be treated like disorders to be lovingly corrected. We would set limits on their dysfunctional, distrustful behavior. But it would not be to punish them. It would be to help liberate them from their addiction or bad habit. It would be a love the sinner, hate the sin sort of attitude towards those in need of correction. Of course, there are certain items like toothbrushes, underwear, shoes, eyeglasses, etc., that people need exclusive rights to because of sanitary reasons or special needs. Even in a very high-trust culture, those items would need to be yours instead of anyone's or everyone's. That exclusiveness is not from lack of trust. It is in the service of meeting overall human needs, some of which must be individually addressed. In such a high-trust culture and sharing-based resource management system, we would understand the way in which we each have our own spirit. We don't possess our spirit, and our spirit does not possess us. Yet each human being has his or her own spirit. It is a soft ownership that accompanies the soft power of love and spirituality or connectiveness. The second helpful concept is that although our spirit is on loan and works somewhat independently of our concrete selves, it is also not who we are. In fact, it is closer to being who we really are than our earthly identity is. Our spirit is our deep self who already knows and understands and fully appreciates and fully utilizes interaction and interconnection because that's the way things are deep within overall reality. Again, a looser mental grip than we are accustomed to having here on the surface is required. Practice at flexible or both and thinking, such as by using and understanding metaphors, could help loosen our mental grip in regards to our self-identity. We gradually get to know not only our connected self, but the realm which is its home. Flexible thinking leads to integrative thinking. Together, they form a mental framework that acts as a gateway to the deep, the other side, or heaven. In both the sense that our spirit is assigned exclusively to us here on the surface of overall reality, and in the sense that it is at the very core of our being, it is our own spirit. But this must be carefully distinguished from our worldly possessive notions of ownership. Ex-President Bill Clinton famously, or infamously, said, "It depends on what is." We can apply the logic here, but for noble purposes instead. When it comes to spiritual understanding, it depends on what own is. Chicken first. Once again, we arrive at a chicken or egg crossroads on our path of spiritual understanding. Which comes first? The chicken of experiencing one's own spirit in dreams or otherwise, or the egg of conceptualizing God to be a spirit that permeates all of existence. The concept of the powerful and judgmental God in the Old Testament seemed to be fleshier than the concept of the loving God emphasized in the New Testament, even though glimpses of the loving God are provided in the Old Testament as well. The older, judgmental, version of God would do less to help us understand spirituality than a concept of a loving God. Flesh manipulates. Spirit orchestrates. Flesh insists on its pound of flesh when it has been wronged. A focus on retribution is flesh-driven. Spirit orchestrates a harmonization of the parts of any creation, including all physical existence. As spiritual thinkers in the Abrahamic faith tradition evolved, they gradually came to conceptualize an increasingly spiritual God of grace and love. I think it was because the passage of time allowed more opportunities for spiritual experiences. Those experiences transformed their understanding of the nature of God. In a way, the true, spiritual, God taught them about himself, herself, itself. When it comes to trying to help someone grow spiritually, I think it's better to start with their spiritual, connective experiences first and then begin to think and talk about God. But we must make sure that the experience is allowed to inform the belief, rather than having the experience and then just willy-nilly attaching it to an available concept/belief about God. It's foolish to place good wine in old wineskins, JC. When we try to help someone grow spiritually by starting with beliefs about God, the fleshy, judgmental, and authoritarian version of God can creep into our thought and interfere with our spiritual growth. People through the ages have projected their own limited understanding onto God. They see God as possessing qualities related to hard power. But that is an anthropomorphic error of assuming God is like us. God is spirit. God consists of and operates by soft power. Even the notion that God performed an action, did something to form creation, is starting to look like flawed understanding to me. God's being, not God's doing, naturally shaped material reality into a much more beautiful form than it otherwise would have been. And eventually the power of God's being will totally transform the physical realm into a more harmonious, fully integrated form. God rubs off on reality. We humans are so doing-oriented that we think God must have made this reality. Making things is of the manipulative, hard power mode. In contrast, the soft power of God's being gradually rubs off on material reality. Eventually, even the rocks will sing out God's glory, JC, because rocks are less real than God's being. When God's spiritual form of being affects the world by rubbing off on it, we experience the power of divine love. Remember how in Chapter 2 I conceptualized love as being the antidote to the fragmentation caused by the mode of doing? Divine love eventually defrags the physical world where doing seems so important. Authentic being and true love become increasingly important as physical reality becomes gradually transformed by the Great Spirit. When Christ said, "The meek will inherit the earth," he was pointing out how the soft power of people humbly cooperating with each another instead of dominating and manipulating each another will ultimately win out over the dog-eat-dog world we made from hard power. The power of love and authentic being is greater in the long run than coercive power. Humanity is a marathon, and you can't sprint a marathon. The slower pace of soft power will win the marathon of the human race. But we can't see the whole marathon now. The Earth that the meek will inherit at the end of the marathon will be an enlightened world order that we have not yet achieved. The meek will continue to be trampled on in the current world order that is dominated by hard power and does not sufficiently appreciate the power of spirit as expressed in authentic being and in true love. And we must experience the soft power of spirituality in order to trust it to help us run the marathon. We must feel its pace and its peace. So, I prefer the chicken of experiencing one's own spirit to the egghead, conceptual, belief-oriented approach. The chicken is the new method, as described in Chapter 3 of Getting to Know One's Connected Self.